I always thought using a card made me more responsible with money. I could see every transaction. I had an app tracking every category. I had spending charts, monthly reports, and notifications telling me exactly where my money was going. So, I figured I was on top of it. Then, I did something that sounded completely backward. I stopped using my debit card for 30 days. No card, no tap to pay, no budgeting app open 10 times a day. Just cash. Honestly, I expected it to be annoying. I expected it to feel old-fashioned. Instead, I spent almost $400 less than my average month. And once I figured out why, I couldn't unsee it. Welcome back to the Zuck Audits. Today, we're not talking about investing. We're not talking about side hustles. We're talking about something much simpler. Why making spending slightly harder might be the easiest way to save money. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm just someone who got tired of swiping without thinking. At the start of the month, I withdrew $600 in cash. I divided it into envelopes, one for groceries, one for eating out, one for everyday spending. And I made a rule. Once the cash was gone, it was gone. No backup card, no emergency swipe. No, I'll figure it out later. Just cash. And what happened next surprised me. The first thing I noticed was how different it felt to actually hand someone cash. If you've ever studied behavioral finance, there's a concept called the pain of paying. And once you experience it, it makes perfect sense. When you tap a card, the transaction feels almost invisible. Money leaves your account, but your brain barely notices. When you hand over actual bills, your brain experiences a small sense of loss. You physically see the money leaving your hand. You physically watch it disappear. And that changes everything. About a week into the experiment, I was standing in line at a convenience store. I picked up a snack I didn't really need. Normally, I would have tapped my card without thinking. But this time, I looked at the cash in my hand, and I hesitated. For maybe 2 seconds. That's it. Just 2 seconds. But that tiny moment of friction made me put it back. And over the course of the month, those tiny decisions added up. Not one dramatic purchase, just dozens of small purchases that never happened.
The second thing I noticed was something a budgeting app could never give me: a hard stop. Cards don't really have stopping points. You can always tap one more time.
You can always tell yourself you'll make up for it later. You can always convince yourself it's not a big deal. Cash doesn't negotiate. When the envelope is empty, it's empty. By the third week, my eating out envelope was running low. And then something interesting happened. Around day 18, I was standing in line at a coffee shop. I had enough cash left. I could buy the coffee. But I knew buying it meant having less money available later in the week.
For the first time, I could actually feel the trade-off. Not on a spreadsheet, not in an app, right there in my hand.
So I walked away. And instead of grabbing takeout later that week, I cooked at home. That's not extraordinary discipline. That's not some secret productivity hack. That's simply what happens when money becomes visible. The third thing surprised me the most. I felt more aware of my spending with 0 apps open than I ever did while using 3 budgeting apps. That sounds ridiculous, but it's true. There's no dashboard to review later. No spending summary waiting for Sunday night. No guilt scrolling through charts. No pretending you'll check your budget tomorrow. You know exactly how much money you have left because it's literally sitting in your wallet. Have you ever tapped your card and barely looked at the total? Be honest. I know I have. In fact, before this experiment, that was basically my default setting. Swipe. Tap, tap. Move on. Repeat. But cash forces awareness. Every purchase becomes real. Every decision becomes visible. And visibility changes behavior. That's the lesson nobody talks about. By the end of the month, I'd spent around $1,800 instead of my usual $2,200. Almost $400 less. And here's the important part. I didn't suddenly become more disciplined. I didn't become better with money overnight. I didn't discover some magical budgeting trick. The money itself simply became harder to spend. And that tiny bit of friction completely changed my behavior. That's the bigger lesson from today's audit. Cash isn't magical. Envelopes aren't magical. The real lesson is that friction changes behavior. The easier spending becomes, the more likely you are to do it without thinking. Modern technology has made spending effortless. One tap, one click, one swipe, and your money is gone. But when spending requires even a small moment of awareness, you naturally make better decisions. Not because you're stronger, not because you're smarter, but because your environment changed. And your environment often matters more than your willpower. That's a principle we talk about a lot here on the Zuck Audits. Because building wealth is usually less about finding the perfect investment and more about designing behaviors that work automatically.
Now, I'm curious. If you had to go cash only for the next 30 days, do you think you'd spend less, more, or exactly the same?
Drop your answer in the comments below. I read as many comments as I can, and I genuinely love to hear your experience. And if you've already done a cash-only challenge before, tell us how much money you saved. Your story might help someone else. If you enjoyed this audit and want more psychology-based money lessons, behavioral finance breakdowns, and real-world experiments that actually change how you think about wealth, hit the like button, subscribe to the Zuck Audits, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next audit, because most people focus on making more money. Here, we focus on understanding why we spend it. Thanks for watching. And as always, let's audit the system together.